Chapter 2. The ghosts weren't quiet anymore. That message, those 3 sentences, reset something in me. A calibration. Like I'd been straining to hear something just beyond frequency, and suddenly it rang clear. You're not wrong. You're not alone. They archived us, too. Watch your step. No name. No IP trace. Just digital breath in a dark room. But it was enough. Enough to remind me I wasn't fighting vapor. That there were others who'd seen behind the curtain and lived to whisper about it. I stopped thinking of my case as an isolated collapse. I stopped trying to fix it. You can't fix something built to fail you. You expose it. You diagram it. You drag it into the light and force people to see the bones beneath the paperwork. So I built a map. Not just of my case, but of every failed thread I touched. Every name that ghosted. Every court that recused. Every board member with a last-minute conflict of interest. I connected it all, who approved what, when it stalled, and who benefited. You'd be amazed how small the legal world gets when you zoom out far enough. Ties form. Paths overlap. Suddenly that friendly mediator wasn't neutral, he'd clerked with the judge. That ethics committee member? She once summer interned at the firm I was filing against. That specialist who contradicted my diagnosis? His brother handled insurance risk for the resort chain. It wasn't conspiracy. It was culture. A culture of quiet handshakes and revolving doors. A culture where objectivity was defined by how politely you suppressed conflict. Where everyone said the right words and none of them meant anything. That's what the ghosts were warning me about. Not some deep state thriller. Not some underground villain lair. But the more terrifying truth, that everyone who mattered knew a little bit. And no one did anything. Because doing something would cost them access. Doing something would mean choosing a side. And people in power don't like choosing. They like staying where they are. Even if it means leaving the rest of us to disappear. So I kept building my map. Every time someone denied involvement, I traced where they'd been 5 years ago. Every time I heard we can't comment on an active investigation, I documented how many cases had been closed with the same phrase, and never heard from again. It wasn't about justice anymore. It was about topology. Finding out where the veins ran. And who was drawing blood without leaving a mark. That's when I found the file. Not mine. Not directly. But it was close enough to raise the hair on the back of my neck. A redacted docket entry in a public archive. Case dismissed. All documents sealed. The plaintiff's name was blacked out. But the timeline matched mine. The injuries matched. The location matched. And when I looked closer, the opposing counsel was the same. That wasn't coincidence. That was cleanup. I dug deeper. The board that denied my complaint had 6 voting members. 2 had ties to the same firm. 1 had previously worked as in-house counsel for the insurance company my resort used. 1 had published articles about frivolous litigation trends in the personal injury space. The other 2? They hadn't shown up to vote. The decision to dismiss had been made by a skeleton quorum. Just enough to slide through. Just enough to seem legitimate. And the most damning part? I wasn't supposed to have that information. It wasn't public. I only saw it because someone, one of the ghosts, maybe, left a misdirected attachment in a folder I had temporary access to. I downloaded it, made copies, encrypted it 6 times over. The next day, the folder was gone. Like it never existed. But I had it. I had proof that the same people tasked with overseeing misconduct were the ones orchestrating silence. That's when I stopped being scared. Not because the risk disappeared. But because the truth is its own kind of armor. And once you wear it, it's the system that starts to blink. I started talking again, but differently. No more pleas to people who filed my documents in digital dumpsters. No more voicemails left for clerks whose job it was to never remember my name. I started publishing. Quietly. Anonymously. Essays disguised as fiction. Datasets wrapped in poetic metaphors. I dropped files in Freedom of Information dead zones, places where whistleblowers were known to watch, even if they didn't speak. Each post was a flare in the dark. Each one said, "I remember. I see you. I know." And the responses came. Not comments. Not likes. But back channels. messages in encrypted forums, untraceable pings from drop sites that vanished 30 minutes after login. Each one a breath from someone who had seen too much and lived with too little. Former assistants, court interns, paralegals who saw redactions before they were official, people who carried boxes full of silence and started to wonder who was dying on the other side of the tape. They didn't give me everything, but they gave me just enough. Snippets of hearing schedules that never posted, screenshots of case files that disappeared a week before statute expiration, notes scribbled in margins of internal memos, too messy, not priority. Wait them out. Wait them out. That was the phrase that broke me open. That wasn't casework. That was strategy. They weren't looking for justice. They were looking for fatigue. And I wasn't tired anymore. I was charged. From that point forward, I didn't just act like a plaintiff. I acted like an investigator. I studied the court's internal procedures, the way one might study battle formations. There were patterns in how filings got misplaced, trends in which judges recused themselves and when. One judge in particular, Smock, had signed 3 separate transfer orders for cases with my same law firm and injury category. All 3 cases had been reassigned, fast-tracked, and buried in sealed mediation. My stomach turned. I wasn't being handled. I was being processed, filtered, removed. But they underestimated one thing. Ghosts don't stop. They haunt. They persist. And when you're already erased, you've got nothing left to lose. I started building what I called the record that can't be redacted. Not one file. Not one document. A distributed archive, copies sent to 5 different places, none of which knew about the others. Encrypted on multiple platforms. Time released. With a failsafe, if something happened to me, it would publish in full. That was the first night I slept. Not peacefully, but purposefully. I wasn't done yet. But I was finally ahead of their script. And that scared them. Because once you see the system from above, once you see how the words bend, how the doors lock behind you, how the rules are written in pencil when they apply to power, you stop asking for the law to save you. You start preparing to survive it. And maybe, if you're lucky, to write something they can't erase. Chapter 3. They taught me the rules so I could believe in them. They taught me procedure so I'd cling to it like a raft while they flooded the room. Taught me to wait my turn, to file properly, to respect process, so that when process became the weapon, I'd be too conditioned to question it. But conditioning fades when survival kicks in. And I wasn't surviving anymore, I was counter-programming. You can only build so many timelines before you start seeing not just patterns, but fractures. Inconsistencies. Contradictions that aren't just errors, they're tells. Clues. And when you piece together enough of those, you start to see the narrative the system tried to overwrite with delay and jargon. That's what I saw now. A hidden language. One where silence meant strategy, and where every polite denial concealed an internal flag: hold, neutralize, ignore. The power wasn't just in what they said. It was in what they never had to. I started building a digital ghost version of myself. Not a clone, an archive. Every legal communication. Every form submission. Phone logs. Audio recordings. Metadata. Timestamps. Draft versions. I turned myself into a living FOIA request. So if anyone wanted to know what happened, they wouldn't get a summary, they'd get the structure. The scaffolding of a cover-up that wasn't hidden by shadows, but by paperwork so thick no one wanted to read it. But someone would. Eventually, someone would. So I kept feeding it. The record. My system of counter-survival. Encrypted, versioned, cloud distributed across low visibility channels with dynamic keys. If you're going to take on a system, you have to stop acting like a person and start acting like a virus. That's what I became. One byte at a time. I coded late into the night, light from my monitor cutting through the dark like a signal flare. This wasn't paranoia. This was preservation. A man once told me, they don't fear the lawsuit. They fear the proof that can't be sealed. I never forgot that. So I built it. Not just files. A living record. Designed to haunt the system long after I'm gone. I began encrypting differently. Not just for privacy, but for permanence. I used redundancy stacking, 7 layers deep data trails scattered across clouds that didn't know they were carrying evidence. Burners routed through old Wi-Fi cafes. A failsafe script set to release every piece of it if my phone ever went offline for more than 72 hours. I didn't do it because I was suicidal. I did it because I was a target. And the moment I became too much work to silence, I needed to make sure I was still heard. People don't understand what that level of fear does to a person. It reshapes your nervous system. You begin scanning everyone. Conversations become chessboards. Smiles become tells. Authority becomes camouflage. And every time someone says just let it go, you hear the word, disappear. I didn't want revenge. I wanted truth that could outlive me. One night, while scanning an old legal database for related cases, I saw something. A misfiled entry. Wrong timestamp. Wrong name format. But when I opened it, there it was. A copy of my original complaint. The one the board claimed never existed. The one they said didn't meet filing protocol. And attached? A review summary. Unpublished. Stamped, high sensitivity. Handle internally. They hadn't just seen my evidence. They'd buried it. They flagged me as a threat, not to safety, but to narrative. And in that moment, I understood fully, the legal system doesn't care if you're right. It only cares if you're quiet.